The air was thick with tension as Buddy, the scruffy stray, stood motionless in front of Mrs. Thompson's corner shop, his brown and black fur matted with the wear of street life. But his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, spoke of something far greater than his circumstances. Tonight, however, there was something different about him. In his mouth, he carried a small, worn doll. Its pink dress was stained with dirt, its button eyes staring blankly. Its one remaining button eye seemed to pierce through the quiet night, begging for answers. Mrs. Thompson's heart caught in her throat as she peered out the shop window. She had seen this dog often, a quiet presence on the edge of her small community, but never had he brought her something like this. She slowly opened the door, hesitant, curious, but terrified at the same time. "What have you got there, boy?" she whispered. The dog didn't bound in like strays usually did. Instead, he stayed perfectly still, the doll clutched delicately in his mouth, his gaze locked with hers. As she reached out to take the doll, Buddy pulled it back slightly, as if trying to tell her, "There's more to this." His eyes never wavered. And then she saw it, a shadow, barely visible in the alleyway, watching them. Whoever it was didn't want to be seen, but they were there, watching Buddy, watching her, watching the doll. Mrs. Thompson's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. As the street lamp flickered twice, plunging the alley into darkness, the dog growled. A low, menacing sound that made her blood run cold. And when the light returned, she saw him, a figure in a dark hoodie, something metallic gleaming in his hand. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Buddy placed the doll at Mrs. Thompson's feet and stood between her and the shadowy figure. His body was tense, protective, as if warning the stranger to stay away. The doll seemed to plead with its remaining button eye, staring up at her in desperation. Mrs. Thompson's breath caught as she realized this wasn't just a stray dog. This was a warning, a sign of something much darker, more urgent than anything she had ever imagined. As she reached for the doll, a small paper fell from its torn seam. She unfolded it, her fingers trembling. On it, written in childish handwriting, was one word: help. "Welcome to HeartForce, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs." Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. The morning sun crept through the dusty windows of Mrs. Thompson's corner shop, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the world seemed to pause, but Mrs. Thompson couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in her chest. Buddy's presence had never been just about food scraps or a fleeting encounter. There was something more, something urgent in his every action, and she couldn't ignore it. As she wiped down the counter, her mind drifted back to the night before. The doll, the strange figure in the alley, and Buddy's unrelenting protectiveness. It had all felt like a warning. But a warning for what? And why had the dog brought that doll to her? She couldn't stop thinking about the word written on the paper. Help. She knew deep down that it wasn't just a coincidence. It was as if Buddy had brought her the doll for a reason. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the shop door opening. She looked up to see Sarah Walker, a woman who had become a regular in the shop. Mrs. Thompson had known Sarah for years, but lately, the woman seemed different, more worn out, the weight of something heavy hanging over her. Sarah's daughter, Kayla, had been in and out of the shop often. Mrs. Thompson could recall countless moments when she'd watched Kayla, the young girl with a quiet strength, clinging to her mother with all the tenderness of a child too familiar with the harshness of life. "Morning, Sarah," Mrs. Thompson greeted her, her voice carrying a note of concern. Sarah forced a smile as she stepped inside, but there was a weariness in her eyes that Mrs. Thompson couldn't ignore. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson," she said, running a hand through her silver hair. "I'm just here to pick up a few things for Kayla. She's not feeling well today." Mrs. Thompson nodded, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Sarah hadn't shared much lately, but she could tell something was off. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said softly. "I hope she feels better soon." Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking again, her voice quiet. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask you, have you seen Kayla's doll lately? It's strange, but she's been asking for it all morning. I thought it might have just gotten misplaced, but Mrs. Thompson's heart skipped a beat. She reached into the back of the counter drawer and pulled out the doll. It was still there, just as Buddy had left it, its pink dress now soiled with dirt, its button eyes staring at her. She didn't need to say anything. Sarah's eyes told her everything. "That's Hope," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she reached out to take the doll. "It's her favorite. She never goes anywhere without it." Mrs. Thompson watched Sarah, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to say. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something strange happened last night. That dog, the stray Buddy, he brought me this doll." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Buddy?" Mrs. Thompson nodded. "Yes, he brought it to me last night, and there was a paper inside with one word on it. Help." A long silence fell over the shop. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped Hope in her arms, and Mrs. Thompson could see the wheels turning in her mind. "What do you think it means?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Mrs. Thompson admitted, "but I think something's happened. Something that we need to understand before it's too late." They both stared at the doll, the worn fabric and the missing button eye, a symbol of the quiet, unspoken struggles that Kayla had faced. The doll had been her constant companion, and now it was at the center of a mystery neither of them could explain. As Sarah clutched the doll to her chest, Buddy appeared at the door, his eyes sharp and alert. Mrs. Thompson noticed how the dog's gaze flickered between Sarah and the doll, as though making sure the pieces were in place. It was as if Buddy knew something they didn't, something he was desperate to communicate. Mrs. Thompson swallowed hard. "Sarah, I think we need to go look for Kayla." "Now." Sarah nodded, her face pale. I'm scared, Mrs. Thompson. What if something's happened to her?" "We'll find her," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice firm. "Buddy's here, and he's already started leading us in the right direction." The two women gathered what they could. Sarah grabbed a coat, and Mrs. Thompson grabbed a flashlight, and they rushed out of the shop, Buddy already leading them down the street. The doll still clutched in his mouth. It was as though he had already mapped out the path they needed to take. They turned a corner and headed toward the park where Kayla had last been seen. The day was gray and heavy with the promise of rain. It was eerily quiet, save for the sound of Buddy's paws padding along the pavement, his every step filled with purpose. The women followed, their hearts pounding, each of them wondering if this was the beginning of something they hadn't prepared for. And then, without warning, Buddy stopped. His nose sniffed the air, his ears perked, and his body tensed. "What is it, boy?" Mrs. Thompson whispered, her voice trembling. Buddy's eyes never left the alley ahead. He was focused, his movements measured, as if he was waiting for something or someone. Mrs. Thompson felt the chill of fear creep over her. "I don't like this. There's something wrong." As they stood frozen, the air heavy with anticipation, they heard it, faint at first but unmistakable. A scream, a child's scream. It was Kayla. The scream echoed through the alley, sharp and raw, like the desperate cry of someone trapped. Mrs. Thompson's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to go still, as if the world had paused to listen. But then Buddy took off. He didn't hesitate. He dashed into the alley, the doll still in his mouth, his movements fueled by instinct and determination. "Kayla!" Sarah cried, but Buddy was already too far ahead. "Buddy, wait!" She started to run after him, but Mrs. Thompson grabbed her arm. "We can't run blindly," she said, her voice tight with fear but steady. "We need to be smart." But Buddy was already a few blocks ahead, and the sounds of his paws hitting the wet pavement urged them forward. Sarah's face was pale, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she clutched the doll to her chest. Mrs. Thompson pulled Sarah close and whispered, "We will find her. We just need to follow Buddy. He knows the way." With Buddy leading them, they quickly moved deeper into the maze of alleys that ran behind the old industrial district. The area was unfamiliar to both women, filled with abandoned buildings and overgrown lots that had long since fallen into disrepair. The faint sound of rain began to pick up, but it didn't stop Buddy. He moved with purpose, his steps growing more urgent. "He's never been this determined before," Mrs. Thompson murmured, her eyes locked on Buddy's back. The dog was moving faster, as if the closer they got, the more desperate his mission became. "Something's wrong, Sarah. He's trying to tell us something." As they approached an old warehouse, the air grew thick with tension. The light from the street lamps flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. The distant hum of machinery was all that could be heard. Buddy stopped in front of a rusted metal door, and he dropped the doll at his feet with a gentle but deliberate motion. His eyes remained fixed on the door as he stood in front of it, his body rigid. "This is it," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice barely a whisper. She stepped forward cautiously, but Sarah stopped her. "Wait, how do we know what's behind that door?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "What if it's a trap?" "We have to take the risk," Mrs. Thompson replied, her hand gripping Sarah's for strength. "We've come this far. We have to believe Buddy. He wouldn't bring us here if it wasn't important." Buddy growled lowly as Sarah took a hesitant step forward, his body language warning her to stay back. He was acting like a guardian, protective and watchful. Mrs. Thompson could feel her heart racing, but she knew there was no turning back now. "Let's call the police," Sarah suggested, her voice filled with panic. "We don't know what we're walking into." Mrs. Thompson nodded, but her eyes never left Buddy. "I'll call them, but we can't wait. If Kayla is in there, every second counts." She reached in her pocket for her phone, dialing 911 quickly. "Yes, I need help. We found something, someone. Please hurry," she said, her voice trembling. "A young girl is missing, and we need assistance immediately." Buddy's growl grew louder, his stance more rigid. Something was wrong, and the urgency in his eyes made it clear that they couldn't wait for backup. Mrs. Thompson gave Sarah one last look before she reached down to pick up the doll from the ground. She held it carefully in her hands, feeling its weight, and in that moment, something clicked inside her. She realized that this doll was more than just a toy. It was a connection, a lifeline. It was a reminder that there was still hope, even in the darkest times. She turned to Sarah, who was still hesitating. "Sarah, we have to move. This doll, it's the last piece we have. Buddy knows something. He brought us here for a reason." Sarah nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Okay, let's do it. Let's find Kayla." With Buddy leading them once more, they approached the old metal door. Mrs. Thompson pressed her ear to the door, listening for any sound from within. There was nothing, only the soft hum of machinery in the distance. She grabbed the handle and twisted it, pushing the door open slowly. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the silence, as if warning them of what lay ahead. Inside was darker than expected. The smell of damp wood and stale air filled the room, and for a moment, Mrs. Thompson felt her stomach lurch. The place was abandoned, its walls covered in graffiti and dirt, but something about it felt off. There was a tension in the air, like the building was holding its breath. Buddy walked in first, sniffing the air with an intensity that sent a chill down Mrs. Thompson's spine. He stopped and turned toward a small hallway at the back of the warehouse, his eyes glowing in the dim light. "That's where she is," Mrs. Thompson whispered. She felt her pulse quicken as she followed Buddy, with Sarah close behind. They rounded the corner and came face to face with a closed door. Buddy pawed at it, whining softly. Mrs. Thompson reached for the handle, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew they were close now, so close to finding Kayla, to unraveling the mystery that had consumed them both. But just as her hand touched the door, they heard it, soft, muffled breathing. And then a voice. "I'm here." Kayla's voice. The moment Kayla's voice pierced through the silence, Mrs. Thompson's heart leaped in her chest. She froze, listening intently, as if daring not to breathe too loudly. The girl's voice was weak, yet unmistakable, and the relief that flooded Mrs. Thompson's body was tempered by the realization of the danger that still lingered in the air. "Kayla," Sarah called out, her voice trembling with both relief and fear. "Sweetheart, we're here. We're coming for you." Buddy, with a low growl, stood at attention, his eyes trained on the door, his body rigid. He had sensed their approach long before they'd heard the voice, but his silent watch was now more urgent than ever. The protective stance he had adopted was like that of a soldier guarding the last remaining hope of a fallen world. Mrs. Thompson slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open. The dim light that filtered in from the outside revealed a small, cramped room. Kayla sat in the corner, her body frail, eyes wide with fear and confusion. She looked pale, but her breathing was steady, a testament to the diligence that her mother had poured into her care. Her small, trembling hands clutched tightly onto her beloved doll, Hope, whose single button eye still stared back at Mrs. Thompson like a witness to the torment. Kayla. Sarah rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside her daughter, her voice breaking with emotion. She reached out to hold her, but Kayla flinched at first, as if she wasn't sure whether the arms around her would bring comfort or more pain. "It's okay, baby," Sarah whispered, gently cupping her daughter's face. "You're safe now. We're going to take you home." But as Sarah held Kayla in her arms, Mrs. Thompson couldn't help but notice something else, something that made her stomach twist in a way that had nothing to do with the shock of finding Kayla alive. There was a strange calm in the room, an almost unnatural stillness that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The room itself felt like it was holding its breath. Buddy, however, wasn't finished. His eyes were fixed on something near the far wall, and with a low growl, he trotted over to the shadowed corner where the faintest of movements caught his attention. Mrs. Thompson turned, her heart pounding, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. The corner was empty, nothing but an old wooden crate and a few discarded items. But as she scanned the room, her eyes landed on something that made her blood run cold. Beneath the crate, almost hidden from view, was a small, worn medical bag, the kind that a respiratory therapist might carry. Mrs. Thompson's heart thudded in her chest as she realized the significance of the find. This was no ordinary kidnapper. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was something much more complex, far more personal. "Sarah," Mrs. Thompson called softly, her voice shaking. "I think we found something." Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with confusion, still trying to process the shock of having Kayla back in her arms. What is it?" she asked, her voice fragile. Mrs. Thompson moved cautiously toward the crate, kneeling down to pull the medical bag into the light. This is his," she whispered. "The man who took her. He's a respiratory therapist. He's been watching you. He's been watching Kayla." Sarah's face paled as Mrs. Thompson opened the bag carefully, revealing bottles of medications, oxygen masks, and equipment meant for someone with severe respiratory issues. Sarah's hands shook violently as she reached for the medical items, each one a cruel reminder of the medical struggle she had faced with her daughter. The one thing she'd worked so hard to protect Kayla from, an expert manipulating a child's medical needs. "He knew everything," Mrs. Thompson murmured. "Every appointment, every treatment. He was trying to save her, like he saved his own daughter." But there was something else in the bag, a small notebook. Mrs. Thompson flipped it open carefully, her eyes scanning the pages filled with meticulous notes about Kayla's condition, her breathing patterns, even her medical history. It was clear this man had spent years studying her, gathering information as if he were her doctor. The worst part, however, was a series of handwritten entries at the back of the notebook. The handwriting was neat, precise, but the words were chilling. "I can fix what the system failed. She'll never suffer again. I'll give her what I couldn't give my own daughter." "I don't understand," Sarah gasped, her voice barely audible. Why would he do this? Why take her?" Mrs. Thompson's heart sank as she understood the full scope of the man's delusion. He hadn't seen himself as a villain. In his mind, he was rescuing Kayla from a broken system. A man who had lost his own daughter to illness. He believed that he could offer a better life, a better care. But at what cost? And why Kayla? The answer became clearer as they heard a faint sound coming from the hallway. Footsteps. Heavy, purposeful. Buddy stiffened, his growl low and deep, a warning signal. Mrs. Thompson instinctively moved in front of Sarah and Kayla, shielding them with her body. She had no idea what she would do if the man returned, but there was no way she was letting him take another step. The footsteps grew louder, and soon a figure appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Thompson felt her breath catch in her throat as she recognized him. It was Michael Anderson, the man who had been so quiet, so elusive. The man whose obsession with fixing the broken system had led him to kidnap a child. "Stay back," Mrs. Thompson shouted, her voice steady but full of fury. "Stay away from her." Anderson froze, his eyes flickering with guilt, with fear. His face was pale, his hands trembling. He stood there for a moment, as if torn between what he had done and what he knew was right. Then, his eyes locked on Buddy, the former rescue dog whose loyalty was unwavering. "I didn't mean to," Anderson whispered, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to fix things. I wanted to save her, just like I couldn't save my own." His words felt like a slap, and Mrs. Thompson's heart broke for the grief he carried. Grief that had twisted his sense of right and wrong until it was unrecognizable. The delusion that had driven him to take Kayla, to isolate her, was too much to bear. But even now, standing in the doorway, he wasn't the villain he had seemed. He was a man who had lost everything and had tried to build his own world of twisted salvation. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with a mixture of grief, confusion, and the weight of shattered illusions. Michael Anderson stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes locked on Buddy, the dog who had once been a trained search and rescue hero. Now, the dog was the symbol of loyalty and truth, a living testament to the difference between what was right and what was twisted. "Please," Anderson whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to give her a chance. I thought if I could save her, if I could give her what I failed to give Grace, everything would be okay. But it's not, is it?" Mrs. Thompson's heart ached, torn between empathy for his sorrow and the deep outrage for the choices he had made. She had seen the same kind of pain in people who had suffered, but she also knew that pain could not be an excuse for causing harm. "Michael," she said softly, her voice firm yet compassionate, "you've hurt this family. You've taken a little girl from her mother. You've caused them fear, pain, and loss. What you did, none of that can be undone by excuses." He lowered his head, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his actions. The guilt that had been buried deep inside him now surfaced like a tidal wave, drowning him in the reality of what he had done. I thought I could fix things," Anderson choked out, his eyes clouded with unshed tears. "I thought if I could give her the care I couldn't give Grace, I would make up for all the mistakes I made. But I lost my way. I've lost everything. My career, my daughter, and now this." Buddy moved forward, slowly, cautiously, his eyes not leaving Anderson's. He stood by the man, as if willing him to understand the truth in his own heart, to realize that redemption came not through control, but through selflessness, through repentance, through making things right. Buddy knew what needed to happen, Mrs. Thompson said quietly, glancing at the dog. "He never stopped searching for Kayla. He never gave up on her, and he never gave up on you, either. It's not too late to change, Michael. It's never too late to do what's right." But as Anderson stared at Buddy, a strange peace began to settle over his broken features. It wasn't a peace of resignation, but a peace that came with the weight of truth. He had taken a child in the belief that he could offer her a better life, but in the end, it was the love of the community, the loyalty of a dog, and the strength of a mother that had shown him the true meaning of salvation. He sank to his knees, his hands shaking as he reached out for the photo of Grace that still lay on the table. With trembling fingers, he touched the image, his face crumpling with grief. "I didn't know how to live with the loss of her," he whispered. "I didn't know how to let go." Mrs. Thompson stood back, watching the scene unfold before her. This was the reckoning, not just for Michael Anderson, but for the entire community. The story of loss, pain, and healing wasn't just about a missing child. It was about how the brokenness of one person had impacted so many lives. How love, even when twisted by grief, could still lead to redemption. As the authorities arrived, Anderson was quietly handcuffed, but there was no celebration in the room. No cheers, no triumphant exclamations. There was only the quiet sound of Kayla's breathing, the soft rustle of the medical bag, and the sound of Buddy's low whine as he stayed by Kayla's side, his head gently resting against her. Kayla was safe. She was home, but the scars, the trauma, would linger for a long time. The road to healing would not be easy, and it would take time. But at least now, the journey would be one of hope and not of darkness. As they left the warehouse, the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden light over the town. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah, and Kayla stood together, each of them holding on to a piece of the past, a piece of the journey they had walked together. And though their hearts still carried the weight of what had happened, there was something lighter in the air now. A shift, a change. As they walked back toward Mrs. Thompson's shop, Buddy trotted beside them, his body tired but his spirit unbroken. He had done his job. He had found Kayla. He had brought her home. In the process, he had shown everyone what true loyalty and love looked like. "I never thought it would end like this," Sarah whispered as she glanced down at her daughter, who was holding Hope tightly in her arms. "I thought I was going to lose her forever." "We all did," Mrs. Thompson replied. "But we didn't, and that's what matters." Buddy's tail wagged slowly, as if in agreement. He had given everything he had, not just to find Kayla, but to bring her back to the people who needed her most. In this journey, we saw how loss, grief, and trauma could shape lives in ways we never expect. We saw a mother, a community, and even a dog who chose to protect, to fight, and to believe in hope even when everything seemed lost. The lesson here is clear. No matter how dark the path may seem, there is always light to be found. True strength lies not in giving up, but in continuing to fight for what is right, even when the odds are against us. It's easy to judge from a distance, but we all carry burdens that are invisible to others. Let this story remind us to show compassion to those who struggle, and to never give up on what matters most: love, loyalty, and the pursuit of justice. Thank you for following this story. What do you think? How did this journey resonate with you? Please feel free to comment below and share your thoughts or any personal experiences you've had with the power of loyalty, love, and redemption. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to HeartForce for more tales of hope and resilience.